Here's William Lane Craig to try to rebut criticisms of his favorite argument for God, the Kalam cosmological argument. For those who haven't heard it, this argument says that everything which begins to exist has a cause, the universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. And of course, Craig believes that such a cause is God.
What would you say is the chief criticism of the Kalam cosmological argument, and then what would you respond with?
Well, by chief criticism, let me describe what I would say substantive criticisms.
Okay. Sounds good.
I don't think that the first premise, whatever begins to exist, is really susceptible to significant criticism.
Why not? At the quantum level, we see particles pop into existence without apparent cause. So apparently, something can begin to exist which didn't exist before without anything causing that change. When it comes to quantum particles, anyway. And if what one means by beginning is that it doesn't have an infinite past, but there was no time when it didn't exist, which is definitely true of time itself and seems to be true of the universe, then it isn't even intuitive to infer that such a thing needs a cause. Why would something need a cause if there was never a time when it didn't already exist? How could it even possibly have a cause if there was never a time when it didn't already exist?
The idea that anything, and in particular the entire universe, could just spring into being uncaused out of nothing is, I think, just metaphysically absurd.
Well, nobody claims that the universe came into existence out of nothing, except for Lawrence Krauss, who has an idiosyncratic definition of nothing. For the universe to come into existence out of nothing, it would have to be preceded by nothing. That doesn't even make any sense, because in order to be preceded at all, something has to be preceded by time rather than nothing. The universe was never preceded by time. It was never preceded at all as far as we can tell. There was never a time when the universe didn't exist in the 13.7 billion years that time has existed. Since you can't cause something to exist when it already exists, the universe could never have been caused, because there was never a time when it didn't already exist. The universe didn't come into existence out of nothing because there was never a time when there ever was nothing.
So the controversial premise in the argument is the second one, that the universe began to exist.
I actually think this is a less controversial premise than the idea that everything which begins to exist has a cause. There is some evidence that the universe began to exist, in the sense that it doesn't stretch backward in time infinitely, but the idea that something can be caused to exist when there was never a time when it didn't already exist seems outright contradictory to me.
And I offer both philosophical arguments and scientific confirmation of this premise. Now, in response to the first philosophical argument based upon the impossibility of an actually infinite number of things, I think the most substantive response would be to simply say that that's the nature of the actual infinite. It's bizarre. It is strange, and just bite the bullet and accept these consequences. And my response to that, I guess, is that I'm kind of a common sense sort of guy, and I just do not believe that things like a Hilbert's Hotel or Bernadette's book, where you have an infinite number of pages in the book with no last page, that and on, the Grim Reaper paradox, that these sorts of things, I don't think they're possible.
Wow, what an impressive rebuttal, an argument from incredulity. While I think the universe probably has a finite past, I see no reason why it would be impossible for the universe to have an infinite past, because, as Bertrand Russell said about infinite regress, there's no logical problem with the idea of a series with no first term. Math can digest that idea just fine. If it's logically possible, if it's mathematically possible, why can't it be physically possible?
In reality. Now, the second argument for the finitude of the past is based upon the impossibility of completing an actually infinite number of things by successively adding one member after another.
That's certainly not a problem if all points in time are equally part of reality, rather than being contingent upon being reached by previous moments in time passing. This is called the B theory of time. The A theory of time says that only the present is real and the future isn't real until it is reached by passing through the present. The past creates the present in this view. I could see how maybe an infinite number of successive events might be impossible according to the A theory of time, but the B theory of time is what the evidence from relativity shows. Physics seems to strongly indicate that all points in time equally occupy reality, and their presence in reality is not contingent upon previous moments in time.
And I think here the important and substantive criticism of this argument would be to deny the dynamic or tensed theory of time, which presupposes that temporal becoming is an objective feature of reality.
That's the A theory of time that physicists largely reject. The evidence seems to show that this view of time makes no sense at all.
Rather, one would defend a tenseless or static theory of time, according to which the universe began to exist only in the sense that a yardstick begins to exist. But obviously, a yardstick doesn't come into being at the first inch or the first quarter inch or whatever.
Yeah.
Not only would an actual infinite number of events be perfectly possible under the B theory of time, the idea that the universe came into being at its earliest moment would be false. The universe didn't come into being at the Big Bang any more than a yardstick comes into being at its first inch, as Craig says. All points in time are equally, in a sense, already part of reality. And again, it is the B theory of time that makes the most sense given the evidence we have from physics.
And so in response to that, I've done my philosophical duty and published two scholarly books on the theory of time, defending a tensed theory of time, and offering objections and refutation of a tenseless theory of time.
I'll put a link in the description to a video I did explaining Craig's nonsensical defense of the A theory of time, or the tensed theory of time as he calls it here. Suffice it to say that he disagrees with Einstein's interpretation of relativity.
Now, with respect to the scientific confirmations from the expansion of the universe and from the thermodynamic properties of the universe, there I think the evidence is very clear. Alex Vilenkin, a very prominent cosmologist at Tufts University, says there are no tenable models of a beginningless universe, a past eternal universe.
He loves to quote Vilenkin on this because Craig thinks that the Bordet-Guth-Vilenkin theorem proves that the evidence that we have about the Big Bang and cosmic inflation show that the universe could not be infinite in age. However, in Craig's debate with Sean Carroll, Carroll cited Alan Guth, a co-author of the Bordet-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, as saying that their theorem does not conclusively prove that the universe could not have had an infinite past.
Now, you might think that, there's a theorem by Alan Guth and Arvind Bordet and Alex Vilenkin that says the universe had a beginning. I've explained to you why that's not true, but in case you don't trust me, I happen to have Alan Guth right here, one of the authors of the Bordet-Guth-Vilenkin theorem. Alan, what do you say? He says, I don't know whether the universe had a beginning. I suspect the universe didn't have a beginning. It's very likely eternal, but nobody knows. Now, how in the world can the author of the Bordet-Guth-Vilenkin theorem say the universe is probably eternal for the reasons I've already told you? The theorem is only about classical descriptions of the universe, not about the universe itself.
I'll put a link in the description to the relevant part of that debate as well.
So I think that all that the critic can say here is that science is provisional, it's tentative, maybe these finds will be overturned in the future, and somehow the eternity of the past restored.
While I don't think that the eternity of the past has been conclusively done away with, I don't think it's even necessary to showing the absurdity of the idea that the universe must have been created. The fact that you can't create something that already exists, and there's obviously no time when the space-time continuum, which is what the universe means, didn't exist, shows that the idea that a universe, or at best a multiverse, could be created is nonsensical.
And to that, I think the quite proper response is that we have no choice but to go on the basis of the scientific evidence as we currently have it, and that the scientific evidence we have is certainly strong and stable enough to warrant the conclusion that the universe is not infinite in the past.
Well, again, that's not consistent with how one of the authors of the theorem, which you cite as evidence of this, interprets his own idea.
To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.